In 1946, an Australian geologist named Reginald Sprigg was walking through the Ediacara Hills, a remote range of rust-coloured mountains north of Adelaide. He was looking for gold. What he found instead was something far more valuable and far more disturbing. Pressed into sandstone slabs nearly 600 million years old, he discovered the fossilized impressions of creatures that should not have existed. They were animals, but animals older than the moment science believed animals could exist. They had no bones, no shells, no teeth. Some were the size of dinner plates. One looked like a quilted oval mattress, a meter long, with no head, no mouth, no brain, no anus. It simply existed, flat against the ancient seafloor, defying every rule biology had written. Sprigg didn't know it yet, but he had opened a window into a chapter of life on Earth that had been completely erased from memory. A world so alien that we still, nearly 80 years later, don't fully understand what we're looking at. And that raises a question that should trouble anyone who thinks about the history of life. What if the first animals on this planet were so fundamentally different from everything alive today that we've forgotten the language they were written in? Before we dive in, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Your support truly helps us continue this work. Thank you. When Reginald Sprigg brought his findings to the scientific community, he was met with polite skepticism. The reason was simple. According to every textbook, every accepted timeline, the first complex animals appeared during the Cambrian explosion, roughly 540 million years ago. It was a sudden, violent burst of evolutionary innovation. Trilobites, arthropods, the ancestors of mollusks and vertebrates, all equipped with hard parts, shells, exoskeletons, the tools necessary for survival in a competitive world. Before that, the oceans were supposed to be a bacterial soup, perhaps some algae, maybe sponges if you were generous. But nothing big, nothing complex, certainly nothing with structure, symmetry, behavior. Yet here was Sprigg, holding fossils from rocks dated to 550 million years ago, maybe older, a full 10 million years before the Cambrian. And these weren't simple blobs. They had organization, repeating patterns, frond-like branches, segmented bodies, circular forms with radial symmetry. Some appeared to have anchored themselves to the seafloor. Others seemed to have moved slowly across microbial mats that covered the ocean bottom like a living carpet. The scientific establishment didn't know what to do with this. Some dismissed them as inorganic structures, pseudo-fossils created by geological processes that mimicked life. Others suggested they were algae or lichens, or perhaps strange mineral formations. Sprigg insisted they were animals, but without hard evidence, without similar fossils found elsewhere, his claims hung in limbo. Then, in 1957, everything changed. A British schoolboy named Roger Mason was rock climbing in Charnwood Forest, central England, when he noticed something odd in the stone face. Branching, fern-like impressions deeply etched into rock that was, impossibly, over 560 million years old. The fossil was named Carnia, after the forest. It was structurally identical to some of the forms Sprigg had found in Australia, thousands of miles apart. Same age, same morphology. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. This was global. And then the floodgates opened. Namibia, the southwestern coast of Africa, in a place so desolate it's called the Skeleton Coast. Geologists working in the Nama Group formations found more, dozens of species, hundreds of specimens, quilted ovals, frond-like organisms, things with threefold radial symmetry that didn't match any living animal group. Then Russia. The White Sea coast, where entire fossil beds preserved communities of these strange creatures. Then Newfoundland. Then China. Suddenly, Sprigg's findings weren't isolated. They were everywhere. An entire biosphere that existed before the Cambrian, thriving in oceans all over the planet, and then vanishing almost completely from the fossil record. In 2004, the International Commission on Stratigraphy made it official. They named a new geological period, the Ediacaran, 635 million years ago to 538 million years ago. 97 million years. For context, that's longer than the entire age of dinosaurs, longer than the time separating us from Tyrannosaurus rex. Nearly 100 million years of complex life that left almost no descendants, no clear evolutionary thread to the modern world. A lost empire. To understand why the Ediacaran period is so shocking, you need to understand what came before it. For roughly 100 million years, Earth had been frozen, completely frozen. Glaciers stretched from the poles to the equator, the entire planet encased in ice up to a kilometer thick. This wasn't a localized ice age. This was Snowball Earth, a runaway climate disaster triggered by a collapse in atmospheric carbon dioxide. Sunlight reflected off the white surface. Temperatures plunged to minus 50 degrees Celsius at the equator. The oceans froze over. Photosynthesis nearly stopped. Life clung to existence in a few small refuges. Hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ice where sunlight could penetrate, perhaps beneath thick ice sheets where volcanic heat kept pockets of liquid water alive. And then, gradually, the planet thawed. Volcanoes continued to erupt, pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere with no plants or weathering to remove it. The greenhouse effect kicked in. Ice began to melt. Within perhaps 10,000 years, Earth swung from frozen wasteland to hothouse. Temperatures soared. The ice retreated. Oceans returned. And life, which had been compressed into tiny, dark corners for millions of years, suddenly had an entire planet to colonize. The world that emerged was unrecognizable. Continents were clustered near the South Pole in a supercontinent called Pannotia, which was already beginning to fracture. Shallow seas flooded the continental shelves. There were no plants on land, no forests, no soil. The continents were bare rock, subjected to intense chemical weathering. Rivers carried nutrients, iron, phosphorus, silica, into the oceans in quantities far greater than today. The water was rich. The sunlight was strong. Oxygen levels, which had been rising slowly for millions of years due to cyanobacteria, reached roughly 40% of modern atmospheric levels. Not enough for large land animals, but more than enough for complex marine life. And covering the ocean floor, everywhere, was a living carpet. Microbial mats, thick layers of cyanobacteria, sulfur bacteria, and other microorganisms that formed a sticky, cohesive surface across the seafloor. In some places, these mats were 10 centimeters thick. They stabilized sediment. They produced oxygen. They leaked organic molecules into the water. And crucially, they created an environment where large, soft-bodied organisms could exist without being buried, without sinking into loose sediment. The mat was solid enough to support them. It was a foundation for an entirely new kind of life. Into this world came the Ediacarans, and they were like nothing that had come before or would come after. Let's start with the most famous and perhaps the strangest, Dickinsonia. Imagine an oval, roughly the size and shape of a bath mat, lying flat on the seafloor. It has no head, no tail, no mouth, no eyes, no gut. Its body is divided into segments that radiate from a central axis, but the segments on either side don't quite match up. It's almost bilaterally symmetrical, but not quite, as if the blueprint was slightly off. The surface is quilted, with repeating ridges that run perpendicular to the axis, giving it the appearance of an air mattress. Dickinsonia could grow. Fossils range from a few millimeters to over a meter in length. It grew by adding segments, always from the posterior end, throughout its life. And it could move. We know this because fossils have been found with feeding traces beneath them, grooves where the organism scraped microbial mat off the seafloor as it inched forward. The speed? About 4 centimeters per day. Glacial but deliberate. For decades, scientists debated what Dickinsonia was. A worm? A cnidarian, like a jellyfish? A fungus? A lichen? In 2018, a team led by Ilya Bobrovsky finally settled the question. They analyzed the molecular fossils, the lipid biomarkers, preserved in Dickinsonia specimens from the White Sea in Russia. They found cholesterol, specifically cholesteroids that are produced exclusively by animals. Not fungi, not bacteria, animals. Dickinsonia was an animal, but an animal that broke every rule. No bilateral symmetry, no front or back, no central nervous system that we can detect, no digestive tract. How did it eat? The leading theory is osmotrophy. It absorbed dissolved organic molecules directly through its skin, possibly secreting enzymes to break down the microbial mat beneath it, then soaking up the nutrients. Its entire body was a stomach. Then there's Charnia. Picture a frond, like a fern leaf, standing upright on the seafloor. It could reach 2 meters in height. The structure is fractal, with primary branches splitting into secondary branches, which split into tertiary branches, all following a precise mathematical pattern. It looks like a plant. It's anchored to the sea floor by a holdfast, a disc-shaped base. But it's not a plant. It lived in water too deep for photosynthesis. It had no leaves, no chlorophyll. So, how did it survive? The fractal structure is the key. Fractals maximize surface area. More surface area means more contact with the surrounding water, which means more opportunity for gas exchange, nutrient absorption, waste diffusion. Charnia was likely an osmotroph as well, pulling nutrients directly from seawater without moving, without hunting, without any active feeding behavior. It simply stood there, for years, maybe decades, slowly growing, slowly branching, a living geometry anchored in the darkness of the deep ocean. And then there's Cambrian. This one changes everything. Cambrian was bilaterally symmetrical, meaning it had a left side and a right side, a front and a back. It was roughly oval, 10 centimeters long, with a thick, muscular foot on the underside. Fossils have been found with scratch marks beneath them, linear grooves carved into the microbial mat. These aren't random. They're directed, systematic, suggesting that Cambrian moved with purpose, scraping food off the mat as it went. Even more striking, some specimens show a structure at the anterior end that paleontologists interpret as a possible mouth. Not a modern mouth with jaws or teeth, but an opening, a place where food could enter a body cavity. If true, Cambrian had a gut, a through gut, with an entrance and an exit. That's a huge evolutionary step. It's the body plan that would eventually lead to mollusks, annelids, arthropods. everything with a digestive system. Kimberella might be the earliest known bilaterian, the ancestor of most animals alive today, including us. But not everything fits familiar patterns. Consider Tribrachidium, a small disc-shaped organism about 3 centimeters across, with a raised 3-lobed structure on its upper surface. 3-fold symmetry, not radial like a starfish, not bilateral like a human, but 3-fold, a symmetry that essentially doesn't exist in modern animals. There are no living descendants, no evolutionary lineage we can trace. Tribrachidium appeared, thrived for millions of years, and then vanished, taking its entire body plan with it. The same goes for Sprigina. It looked segmented, almost like a trilobite, with a head shield and a body divided into repeating units. For years, paleontologists thought it might be an ancestral arthropod. But the more they studied it, the less it fit. The segments didn't correspond to true somites. The head shield had features that didn't match any known arthropod structure. Sprigina might have been converging on the arthropod body plan, experimenting with segmentation, but it wasn't an arthropod. It was something else, something that evolution tried, then discarded. Across the world, from Newfoundland to Namibia, from the White Sea to the Flinders Ranges, the story is the same. Strange forms, quilted bodies, frond-like organisms anchored to the seafloor, radial symmetries that don't exist today, bilateral forms that don't quite match modern groups, and all of them soft, completely soft. No mineralized tissues, no calcium carbonate shells, no silica spicules, no bone, no cartilage, no chitin. In a world full of predators, they would have been defenseless. But there were no predators. That's the key. The Ediacaran was a world without fear. Think about what that means. In modern oceans, every organism is either hunting or being hunted. Predators evolve speed, strength, venom, teeth. Prey evolves armor, camouflage, toxins, escape behaviors. The arms race between predator and prey has been driving evolution for over 500 million years. It's why we have shells, why we have bones, why we have eyes and ears and nervous systems fast enough to react in milliseconds. But in the Ediacaran, none of that existed. There were no mouths designed for killing, no claws, no jaws. The largest organisms were grazers and osmotrophs. They moved slowly or didn't move at all. They absorbed food. They grew. They reproduced. And then they died, and their bodies settled into the sediment, preserved by the microbial mat that covered them like a burial shroud. The preservation itself is remarkable. Soft-bodied organisms almost never fossilize. Flesh decays. Bacteria consume it. Within days, sometimes hours, there's nothing left. Yet Ediacaran fossils are abundant, often exquisitely detailed, showing fine surface textures, internal structures, even the traces of feeding behavior. How? The answer lies in those microbial mats. These weren't just passive surfaces. They were biochemically active, producing sticky exopolymers that glued sediment particles together. When an organism died and sank onto the mat, it was quickly covered by a thin layer of sediment. The mat sealed it in, creating an anoxic, low-decay environment. Meanwhile, minerals precipitated from the seawater, replacing the organic tissues grain by grain, preserving the shape in 3 dimensions. It's called Ediacaran-style preservation, and it only worked because of the mats. Once animals evolved the ability to burrow, to churn the sediment, the mats were destroyed, and the preservation window closed. That's why we have so few fossils from the early Cambrian, despite an explosion of diversity. The mats were gone, and soft bodies decayed before they could be preserved. But in the Ediacaran, the mats were everywhere. They covered the sea floor like a planetary lawn, and they created an environment where life could be soft, slow, and strange. The ocean floor was a garden, and for nearly 100 million years, it flourished. The oxygen levels were rising. By the middle of the Ediacaran, atmospheric oxygen had reached perhaps 40% of modern levels, maybe slightly higher in some estimates. That's enough to support active, mobile organisms with aerobic metabolisms. It's enough to allow larger body sizes, more complex tissues, more energetically expensive lifestyles. And we see that in the fossil record. Early Ediacaran organisms, right after Snowball Earth, are mostly simple, small, mat-encrusting forms. But by 550 million years ago, we're seeing organisms half a meter long, moving, grazing, interacting with their environment. The water temperature had stabilized. After the hothouse conditions immediately following Snowball Earth, the climate settled into something more moderate. Estimates suggest tropical sea surface temperatures between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius, cooler than today, but warm enough for complex life. The continents were eroding rapidly, and rivers were dumping phosphorus and iron into the oceans. Phosphorus is the limiting nutrient for most marine ecosystems. More phosphorus means more primary productivity, more algae, more food for grazers and filter feeders. The Ediacaran oceans were nutrient-rich, oxygenated, and teeming with microbial life. It was a paradise, as long as you didn't need to run from anything. And then we come to the Rangeomorphs, and things get truly alien. These organisms are named after Rangeomorph, one of the first to be discovered, and they represent some of the most bizarre life forms ever to exist on Earth. They look like fractals rendered in flesh. Imagine a central stalk anchored to the seafloor, with branches that split and split again, and split again, each division following the same proportional rule. The result is a structure that looks more like a computer-generated image than a living organism. The most famous Rangeomorph is Fractal. It's been found in Newfoundland, in deep water sediments where no sunlight could penetrate. Some specimens are tiny, a few centimeters. Others are over 40 centimeters long. And here's the truly strange part. They reproduced in two ways. Some Fractal grew from stolons, horizontal runners that spread across the seafloor and budded off new individuals like strawberry plants. Others appear to have released waterborne propagules, tiny structures that drifted with the currents and settled far from the parent. It's a dual reproductive strategy, and it allowed Fractal to colonize vast areas of the deep ocean floor. But what were they eating? They couldn't photosynthesize. They had no mouths, no guts, no obvious way to capture food. The fractal structure suggests they were maximizing surface area for osmotrophic feeding, absorbing dissolved organic molecules directly from the water. But where did the molecules come from? The leading hypothesis is that the Ediacaran oceans, particularly in deeper waters, were rich in dissolved organic carbon. It leaked from microbial mats, from decaying organisms, from bacterial communities in the water itself. The Rangeomorphs were living in a dilute organic soup, soaking up nutrients passively, growing slowly, anchored in the darkness. It's a lifestyle that doesn't exist anywhere on Earth today, not at that scale. There are modern organisms that feed osmotrophically, certain bacteria, fungi, even some parasitic worms. But they're small, microscopic, or millimeters in size. The idea of a half-meter tall organism feeding purely by absorption, with no gut, no mouth, no active feeding, is almost incomprehensible. But it worked. For tens of millions of years, it worked. So what were these organisms? Animals? Something else entirely? In the 1980s, a German paleontologist named Adolf Seilacher proposed a radical idea. He argued that the Ediacaran organisms weren't animals at all. They were a separate kingdom of life, which he called Vendobionta, or Vendozoa. According to Seilacher, these organisms had a unique body plan, something he called quilted construction. Instead of tissues made of cells tightly packed together, like in modern animals, the Vendobionta had bodies divided into compartments, like an air mattress. Each compartment was isolated, filled with fluid or tissue, and the whole structure was held together by a flexible outer membrane. This design would have been strong, resistant to tearing, and highly adaptable in shape. Seilacher pointed out that many Ediacaran fossils don't show the kind of internal anatomy you'd expect from animals. No muscles, no nervous tissue, no blood vessels. They're too simple, but they're also too organized to be bacteria or algae. They must be something in between, a parallel experiment in multicellularity that arose independently from animals, plants, and fungi, and then went extinct without leaving any descendants. It's a compelling theory, but it has problems. The discovery of cholesterol in Dickinsonia strongly suggests it was an animal. Cambria's bilateral symmetry, its scratch marks, its possible mouth, all point to an animal body plan. And some of the frond-like forms share structural features with modern cnidarians, the group that includes jellyfish and corals. So maybe the Ediacarans weren't a separate kingdom. Maybe they were early animals, stem group organisms that split off from the main animal lineage before the evolution of key features like heads, complex guts, and centralized nervous systems. But then you have Tribrachidium with its threefold symmetry and the Rangeomorphs with their fractal geometry, and none of it quite fits. The truth is, we still don't know. We're looking at an evolutionary experiment that lasted 97 million years and left behind a fossil record that's simultaneously rich and frustratingly incomplete. We have the bodies, but we don't have the biology. We can see what they looked like, but we can only guess at how they lived, how they reproduced, how they sensed their environment, if they sensed it at all. In 2018, the cholesterol study was a breakthrough. It confirmed that at least some Ediacarans, Dickinsonia specifically, were animals. But cholesterol is just one molecule. It tells us about metabolism, not about anatomy. Then, in 2019, a team working in the Dengying Formation in southern China announced the discovery of bilateral trace fossils, burrows, and tracks, dated to 555 million years ago. These weren't just surface trails like those left by Cambrian. These were three-dimensional burrows, tunnels dug into the sediment by organisms with enough muscle control and sensory coordination to navigate through solid substrate. That requires a nervous system. It requires muscles arranged in antagonistic pairs. It requires a head, or at least a front end, with sensors that detect chemical gradients, oxygen levels, food. These organisms were behaviorally complex. They were making decisions. And yet, we don't have their bodies. The burrows are there, but the creatures that made them didn't fossilize, or we haven't found them yet. They were probably small, worm-like with no hard parts. But they were there, moving through the sediment, and that changes the picture. The Ediacaran wasn't just a world of passive, sessile organisms. There was activity, there was behavior, there was, perhaps, the beginning of cognition. In 2021, researchers using three-dimensional laser scanning on Fractal specimens from Newfoundland discovered internal structures, branching channels within the body that might have been circulatory or nutrient distribution systems. If true, that means Fractal wasn't just absorbing nutrients through its skin. It was moving them internally, perhaps with some kind of fluid transport. That's a leap in complexity. It suggests that even the most alien Ediacarans were developing internal organization, early steps toward the organ systems we see in modern animals. And then, in 2003, came a discovery that genuinely shocked the paleontological community. In Namibia, scientists found fossils of an organism called Ernietta. Ernietta was a small, pouch-like creature, a few centimeters tall with a quilted exterior. But the new specimens showed something unprecedented: embryonic stages. Tiny Ernietta fossils, preserved inside or near the adults, showing progressive stages of growth from a simple structure to a more complex one. This is evidence of sexual reproduction, of a life cycle with developmental stages. And it means that by 547 million years ago, Ediacaran organisms had evolved sophisticated reproductive strategies. In 2022, a team in South China published a paper describing trace fossils that showed coordinated, directed movement. Not random wandering, but systematic search patterns, organisms moving back and forth across the seafloor in what looks like a grid, presumably searching for food. The behavior is sophisticated. It requires sensory input, decision-making, motor control. It requires a nervous system. And it's dated to 550 million years ago, deep in the Ediacaran. What this tells us is that while the large, conspicuous Ediacarans, the Dickinsonias, and the Charnias were dominating the visible fossil record, there was something else happening beneath the surface, literally. Small, mobile, bilaterally symmetrical organisms were evolving complex behaviors, nervous systems, directed movement. They were the hidden players, and they were the future. In 2014, a team analyzing early Cambrian rocks in South Australia discovered something extraordinary. A fossil, barely a centimeter long, with a bilateral body plan, a head, a tail, and crucially, a gut. They named it Icaria warriutia, and it's dated to 555 million years ago, right in the heart of the Ediacaran. Icaria is the oldest known bilaterian with a through gut, a digestive system with a mouth at one end and an anus at the other. It's small, it's simple, but it's us. It's the body plan that would eventually lead to fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. It's the ancestor, and it lived alongside the Ediacarans. For millions of years, Icaria and organisms like it coexisted with Dickinsonia and Charnia and Fractal. They were part of the same world. But Icaria had something the Ediacarans didn't, a digestive system that could process solid food. It didn't need to absorb nutrients passively. It could eat. And once it could eat, it could evolve into something that ate other animals. A molecular clock study published in 2020 estimated when different animal lineages diverged from one another. The results were surprising. Many of the major animal phyla, including mollusks, arthropods, and chordates, diverged from each other deep in the Ediacaran, possibly as far back as 600 million years ago. That means the ancestors of those groups were alive during the Ediacaran. They were there, coexisting with the large, soft-bodied organisms. But they were small, microscopic, or nearly so. They left almost no fossils. They were the hidden revolution, the organisms that would eventually inherit the Earth, living in the shadow of the giants. This raises a fascinating possibility. What if the Ediacaran period wasn't really the age of the Ediacarans? What if it was the age of the microbial mats, and the Ediacarans were just the most visible inhabitants? What if the real revolution was happening out of sight, in the microscopic realm, where tiny worms and early arthropods and the ancestors of vertebrates were evolving the traits, the guts, the nervous systems, the bilateral symmetry that would later explode into the Cambrian diversity? The Ediacarans filled the visible niche, but beneath them, the future was brewing. And then, around 543 million years ago, something changed. We start seeing the first hard parts. An organism called Cloudina appears in the fossil record. It's small, a few millimeters long, with a calcium carbonate tube. It's one of the first organisms to biomineralize, to build a skeleton. And shortly after, we see Namacalathus, another organism with a small calcium carbonate cup. These aren't full skeletons. They're not bones or shells in the modern sense, but they're the beginning. They're the first experiments with armor. Why did biomineralization evolve? The traditional answer is defense against predators. But if predators weren't yet widespread, that doesn't fully explain it. Alternative explanations include structural support, protection against environmental stress, or a way to regulate internal chemistry. But in 2016, a study analyzed the microstructure of these early skeletons and found something interesting. The calcium carbonate wasn't randomly precipitated. It was organized, layered, with sophisticated biological control. That level of complexity suggests the genetic machinery for building skeletons had been evolving for a long time, waiting for the right environmental trigger. That trigger was probably the combination of rising calcium levels in the oceans and the first hints of predation, because around the same time, we start seeing something else in the fossil record. Small shelly fauna, tiny organisms, a few millimeters to a few centimeters long, with tubes, conical shells, spiny plates. They were armored. And the only reason to evolve armor is if something is trying to eat you. By 540 million years ago, oxygen levels had reached roughly 50 to 60% of modern levels, maybe higher. That's enough to support active predation, sustained swimming, complex nervous systems. The ocean chemistry had shifted. Calcium was abundant. And crucially, the genetic toolkit was in place. Hox genes, the developmental regulatory genes that control body patterning, had been refined. Small changes in Hox gene activity could now produce large changes in the body shape. The stage was set. The Cambrian explosion was about to begin, and when it came, it was fast. Within perhaps 10 million years, starting around 538 million years ago, the oceans went from a soft-bodied garden to an armored battlefield. Trilobites appeared, with compound eyes and segmented exoskeletons. Anomalocaris, a predator nearly a meter long, swam through the water with grasping appendages and a circular mouth designed for crushing. Mollusks developed shells. Arthropods developed exoskeletons. Brachiopods, echinoderms, chordates, Nearly every major animal phylum that exists today appeared within 20 million years. The tree of animal life exploded into a forest. And the Ediacarans? They vanished. Around 538 million years ago, roughly 80% of Ediacaran species went extinct. It's called the end Ediacaran extinction, and it's one of the least understood mass extinctions in Earth's history. There's no evidence of an asteroid impact, no massive volcanic eruptions, no sudden climate shift. The oxygen levels were rising. The oceans were stable. So what happened? The answer, increasingly, seems to be evolution itself. Specifically, the evolution of predation. For nearly 100 million years, the Ediacaran oceans were peaceful. Organisms didn't need armor because there was nothing to defend against. They didn't need speed because there was nothing to run from. But somewhere, probably in multiple places independently, organisms began to evolve the ability to consume other organisms. Not by absorbing them, not by filtering them, but by ingesting them. A mouth, a gut, the ability to bite, tear, swallow. The first predators were probably small, maybe worm-like. Maybe they started by scavenging dead organisms, then moved to eating live ones. But once predation evolved, it created a selection pressure unlike anything the Ediacaran world had seen. If you could be eaten, you needed to defend yourself. If you couldn't defend yourself, you went extinct. And soft-bodied, slow-moving, passive organisms like Dickinsonia and Charnia couldn't defend themselves. They had no shells, no spines, no toxins, no speed. They were defenseless. The fossil record shows the arrival of predation in stages. First, the small shelly fauna with their armor. Then trace fossils indicating bioturbation, the churning of sediment by burrowing organisms. Animals were digging into the seafloor, searching for food, hiding from predators, creating three-dimensional habitats. And when they did, they destroyed the microbial mats. The mats couldn't survive constant disturbance. They were scraped away, eaten, buried. And without the mats, the Ediacaran organisms lost their foundation. The solid surface they relied on turned into loose, shifting sediment. Sessile organisms like Charnia couldn't anchor. Grazers like Dickinsonia couldn't feed. The entire ecosystem collapsed. This wasn't a catastrophe from outside. This was evolution eating itself. The Cambrian organisms didn't intend to destroy the Ediacarans. They were just living, feeding, reproducing. But in doing so, they changed the world so fundamentally that the Ediacarans couldn't survive in it. And then, around 520 million years ago, vision evolved. The first eyes appear in the fossil record belonging to trilobites. And they're not simple light detectors. They're compound eyes with multiple lenses, capable of forming clear images, detecting movement, tracking prey. Vision transformed everything. Predators could see their prey from a distance, target them specifically, pursue them across space. Prey could see danger coming and flee before it was too late. The entire ecology became visual, a competition of seeing and being seen. Some scientists, notably Andrew Parker, have argued that the evolution of vision was the primary trigger for the Cambrian explosion. The moment predators could see, they became exponentially more dangerous. And the moment prey could see, they had a chance to survive, but only if they evolved defenses fast enough. The result was an evolutionary arms race that accelerated diversification and drove the evolution of hard parts at breathtaking speed. If this hypothesis is correct, then the Ediacarans went extinct Not just because of bioturbation and the loss of microbial mats, not just because of the evolution of guts and predation, but because the world became visible. In a world of blind, chemosensory organisms, being large, slow, and conspicuous was fine. But the moment eyes appeared, those traits became fatal liabilities. Imagine being Dickinsonia in a world with trilobites. You're lying on the seafloor, a meter-long oval, absorbing nutrients from the microbial mat. You have no sense of danger, no awareness that anything is hunting you. And then, from across the seafloor, a trilobite sees you. It sees your outline, your movement, your vulnerability. It approaches. You don't know it's coming. You can't flee. You can't fight. You're just there, exposed, defenseless, and you're consumed. That's how the Ediacaran world ended. Not in a single moment, but across millions of years, as vision spread, as eyes became more sophisticated, as the oceans filled with organisms that could see and hunt and kill with a precision that had never existed before. The soft-bodied, blind, passive world didn't stand a chance. Eyes evolved independently, multiple times, in different lineages. Arthropods evolved compound eyes. Mollusks evolved camera eyes, structurally similar to vertebrate eyes, but built from different developmental pathways. Vertebrates evolved their own camera eyes. Even some worms evolved simple eye spots. The same solution arrived at again and again, because the advantage it provided was overwhelming. Once one lineage had eyes, every other lineage needed them too, or needed a way to hide from them. The Ediacaran world didn't have the pieces in place for vision. Oxygen levels were still rising. Nervous systems were just beginning to evolve. The genetic toolkit for sensory organs was being assembled, but it wasn't there yet. The Ediacarans lived in the last moments of a blind world, and by the time vision evolved, it was too late for them to adapt. But here's the thing that should make us pause. Some Ediacaran-style organisms might have survived. In 2007, a fossil was found in Cambrian rocks in Siberia, dated to 520 million years ago, well after the end Ediacaran extinction. It looked like a Rangeomorph, same fractal structure, same quilted texture. If it's genuine, if it's not a case of mistaken identity, it means that at least some Ediacarans made it into the Cambrian. They survived the extinction. They coexisted with trilobites and predators and the new armored fauna. And then, eventually, they disappeared anyway, overwhelmed by a world that no longer had room for them. There are other hints. Frond-like fossils from China, possible relatives in early Cambrian rocks from various locations. The data is sparse and heavily debated, but it raises the possibility that the Ediacaran biota didn't go extinct in a single catastrophic event. They faded. They persisted in marginal environments, deep water, low oxygen zones, places where the new predators couldn't reach them, and where microbial mats could still survive. And then, slowly, over tens of millions of years, they vanished. We'll never know exactly what it was like to live in the Ediacaran oceans. We can't know what it felt like to be Dickinsonia, if it felt like anything at all. But we can look at the fossils and see something profound. For nearly 100 million years, life on Earth tried a different path. It built ecosystems without violence. It created organisms that didn't need to fight, didn't need to run, didn't need to kill. And it worked. It worked so well that those organisms grew to sizes never seen before in non-skeletal life. They covered the seafloor. They diversified into hundreds of species. They thrived. And then the rules changed. Predation emerged, and with it came competition, arms races, extinction. The soft couldn't compete with the hard. The slow couldn't outrun the fast. The passive couldn't fight the aggressive. The Ediacaran world was peaceful, alien, and ultimately doomed. But it left us something crucial. It left us evidence that evolution is not a ladder climbing toward perfection. It's a branching bush, trying every possible solution to the problem of survival. Some branches grow, flourish, and then are cut off, leaving only fossils pressed into ancient stone. The Ediacarans were one of those branches. They were an answer to a question that evolution no longer asks. Looking forward, the scientific community is gearing up for what might be the most significant Ediacaran research in decades. In 2025, a multinational team is planning an expedition to the White Sea coast in northern Russia, one of the richest Ediacaran fossil sites in the world. The goal is to find specimens with exceptional preservation, possibly including traces of internal organs or even organic molecules. The White Sea fossils are preserved in fine-grained sandstone that has undergone minimal alteration, meaning original biochemical signatures might still be present. If they can extract and analyze those molecules, we might finally answer the question: what were these organisms, really? There's also ongoing work in South Australia, where new fossil beds are being uncovered in the Flinders Ranges. In 2023, a team reported finding trace fossils directly underneath Ediacaran body fossils, suggesting that some organisms were beginning to disrupt the microbial mats, even before the Cambrian. If confirmed, it means the transition wasn't sudden. It was gradual, and some Ediacarans might have been agents of their own environmental change. But the biggest questions remain. Why did they look so strange? Why did they adopt body plans that don't exist today? And most fundamentally, what does their existence tell us about the nature of complex life itself? One possibility, rarely discussed but genuinely unsettling, is that the Ediacarans might have experienced existence in a way we cannot access or imagine. Consciousness, as we understand it, is built on sensory input processed through a nervous system. We see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Our brains construct a model of reality from these inputs and generate subjective experience. But the Ediacarans had none of that, or at least no evidence of it. No eyes, no obvious sensory organs, no centralized nervous system we can detect. So what was it like to be Dickinsonia, if it was like anything? Was there subjective experience in lying on the seafloor, slowly absorbing nutrients, growing by adding segments, moving 4 centimeters per day toward chemically detected food? Or was it pure mechanism, cells responding to gradients with no accompanying awareness? We can't know. Consciousness doesn't fossilize. But the question haunts anyone who thinks deeply about these organisms. Because if they did have some form of experience, some alien mode of awareness that operated without senses or brains, then we've lost access to an entire way of being. A form of consciousness that arose once, persisted for 100 million years, and vanished completely when they went extinct. Imagine awareness based not on sensory input, but on direct chemical sensing. Not on thinking as we understand it, but on distributed processing across an entire body, each segment responding semi-autonomously to local conditions, with no central processor, no localized self. It sounds like science fiction, but it might have been real. And if it was, then extinction claimed more than just species. It claimed entire modes of existence, subjective universes we can never recover or understand. This is the tragedy of extinction on a level we rarely consider. When a species vanishes, we might lose not just genetic diversity, but entire forms of experience, unique perspectives on reality that arose through billions of years of evolution and will never arise again. The Ediacarans might have taken worlds with them when they died. Interior worlds, experiential worlds, and we'll never know what those worlds were like. That recognition should change how we think about biodiversity, about conservation, about the value of life in all its forms. Every species might contain a unique way of being, an irreplaceable window into possible experience. When we cause extinctions today, we might be destroying not just organisms, but perspectives, modes of consciousness, forms of awareness we haven't even begun to understand. The Ediacarans teach us humility. They show us that life can be radically different from what we know. That complexity doesn't always lead toward intelligence or even toward anything we'd recognize as behavior. That evolution experiments constantly, and most experiments fail, but each one is unique and unrepeatable. In the rocks of the Ediacara Hills, in the cliffs of Mistaken Point in Newfoundland, in the deserts of Namibia, the bodies of those organisms remain. Silent, strange, a testament to a world that existed long before bones, before teeth, before fear. And as we stand here, more than 600 million years later, trying to piece together what they were, how they lived, why they vanished, we're forced to confront a truth that should humble us. We are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are one outcome among billions, shaped by contingency, by luck, by the specific sequence of events that happen to unfold on this particular planet. The Ediacarans were another outcome. They succeeded by being soft in a world without predators. We succeeded by being hard in a world full of them. They failed when their world changed. We persist because so far the world has allowed it. But the world is always changing. And evolution, as the Ediacarans learned, does not pause, does not care, does not forgive. Reginald Sprigg didn't find gold in the Ediacara Hills. He found something far more valuable. He found proof that life, at its beginning, was written in a language we're still learning to read. In those strange, quilted, frond-like impressions, we see not our ancestors, though some might be distantly related, but our alternatives. The paths not taken, the experiments that failed, the kingdoms that fell. And perhaps that's the most important lesson the Ediacarans can teach us. That life is fragile, that dominance is temporary, that the rules of survival can change suddenly and completely, that somewhere, pressed into stone, there are always ghosts of worlds we never knew, waiting to remind us how easily everything can be lost. The Cambrian explosion, when it finally arrived in full force, was not gentle. Within 20 million years of the start of the Cambrian, nearly every major animal phylum that exists today had appeared. Arthropods, mollusks, annelids, chordates, echinoderms, brachiopods. The tree of animal life exploded into a forest, and the Ediacarans, those soft relics of a gentler age, were buried beneath it. But why did this happen so suddenly? The answer is that multiple factors converged. Oxygen had crossed a critical threshold. Calcium had become abundant in the oceans, allowing biomineralization. Predation had created selection pressure for both weapons and defenses. And the genetic toolkit, particularly Hox genes that control body patterning, had reached a level of complexity where small changes could produce large morphological innovations. It was a perfect storm of evolutionary opportunity, and once it began, it accelerated. Predators evolved better hunting tools. Prey evolved better defenses. Each innovation on one side drove innovation on the other. It's an arms race, and arms races accelerate diversification faster than almost any other evolutionary process. The Burgess Shale in British Columbia preserves a snapshot of this world, dated to about 508 million years ago. It shows us the Cambrian in exquisite detail, and what it reveals is shocking. Many of the animals don't fit into any modern group. Opabinia, with 5 eyes and a flexible, grasping proboscis. Hallucigenia, walking on stilted legs with spines covering its back. Anomalocaris, the apex predator, nearly a meter long. These were experiments, body plans that evolution tried and then discarded. Stephen Jay Gould wrote about the Burgess Shale in his book, Wonderful Life, arguing that the Cambrian was a period of maximum morphological diversity. Evolution was trying everything. Most experiments failed. The organisms went extinct, leaving no descendants. But a very few, survived and became the ancestors of everything alive today. Gould's point was that history is contingent. If you could rewind the tape and play it again, you'd get a completely different outcome. The fact that we exist, that vertebrates exist, is the result of chance events that could easily have gone differently. This makes the Ediacarans even more poignant. They weren't just outcompeted. They represented an entire alternative approach to being a large, complex organism. And that approach worked brilliantly for nearly 100 million years. But when the rules changed, it failed catastrophically. Some researchers argue that certain Ediacaran lineages didn't go extinct, but evolved into modern groups. Kimberella might be related to mollusks. Some frond-like organisms might be related to sea pens, modern cnidarians. If true, then the Ediacarans didn't entirely vanish. They transformed. But the evidence is thin and heavily debated. Most Ediacaran fossils show no clear morphological links to modern animals. The quilted construction, the bizarre symmetries, the apparent lack of complex organs all suggest they were something genuinely different. What we can say with increasing confidence is that the ancestors of modern animal groups were present during the Ediacaran. Molecular clock studies place the divergence of major phyla deep in the Ediacaran, possibly 600 million years ago or earlier. But these ancestors were small, possibly microscopic. They left almost no fossils. They were invisible compared to the large, conspicuous Ediacarans. But they were the ones carrying the genetic innovations, the bilateral symmetry, the through guts, the nervous systems that would later explode into Cambrian diversity. So the Ediacaran wasn't really the age of the Ediacarans. It was the age of transition. The visible megafauna were living fossils almost from the moment they appeared, relics of a Snowball Earth recovery that created unique conditions. The real future was happening in the microscopic realm, out of sight, waiting for environmental conditions to shift just enough to allow those tiny organisms to grow, to diversify, to dominate. And when those conditions arrived, the change was swift. By 530 million years ago, the Ediacaran world was gone. The microbial mats were destroyed. The dissolved organic carbon was depleted. The slow, soft, passive lifestyle was no longer viable. A new world had begun, one of speed and armor and eyes and teeth. a world that would eventually produce us. We are the inheritors of the Cambrian revolution, not the Ediacaran one. Our bodies are built on the bilateral blueprint that evolved in the shadow of those strange quilted organisms. Our eyes are descended from the first visual systems that made the Ediacarans extinct. Our intelligence evolved from nervous systems originally used for hunting and escaping, for navigating a dangerous world where violence was the norm. The Ediacarans couldn't have produced us. Their world, their body plans, their way of life didn't lead toward complexity of the kind that generates consciousness. They were beautiful, they were successful, but they were a dead end. And recognizing that should give us perspective. Evolution doesn't have a direction. It doesn't progress toward anything. It simply explores possibilities, and some possibilities work until they don't. The Ediacarans worked for nearly 100 million years. We've existed as a species for a few 100,000. In geological terms, we're brand new. We have no idea if we'll last another 100,000 years, let alone another 100 million. We're just the current experiment. And like all experiments, we'll either succeed or fail, and evolution will continue without us if we fail. But here's what makes us different. What makes us potentially more than just another branch on the tree. We can learn from the past. We can study the Ediacarans, understand why they went extinct, and ask whether we're making similar mistakes. They couldn't adapt when their environment changed. They were too specialized, too dependent on specific conditions. When those conditions vanished, so did they. We're facing environmental changes now, changes we're causing ourselves. Climate shift, ocean chemistry alteration, biodiversity collapse. We're modifying the planet as profoundly as bioturbation modified the Ediacaran seafloor. And the question is whether we can adapt, whether we can change our behavior fast enough to survive the changes we're creating. The Ediacarans couldn't choose. They had no awareness of their impending extinction, no capacity to alter their fate. But we can choose. We have the intelligence to understand what's happening. We have the tools to measure it, model it, predict it. We have the collective capacity to change course. Whether we will is another question entirely. The rocks will preserve our answer. Billions of years from now, if any intelligence examines Earth's geological record, they'll see the Ediacaran period and its sudden end. They'll see the Cambrian explosion and the diversification that followed. And they'll see our period, whatever name future geologists give it, and they'll see how it ended, whether in extinction, in transformation, or in something we can't yet imagine. The Ediacarans left fossils and questions. What will we leave? The answer is being written now, in the choices we make, in the world we build or destroy, in the knowledge we preserve or lose. We're not guaranteed to succeed. Evolution doesn't guarantee anything. But we have something the Ediacarans didn't. We have awareness. We have the ability to understand our place in deep time, to learn from extinctions past, to recognize that we're part of a story that began billions of years ago and will continue long after we're gone. That awareness is both a gift and a burden. It allows us to appreciate the wonder of existence, to marvel at organisms like the Ediacarans that solve the problem of life in ways we can barely comprehend. But it also forces us to confront our own mortality, not just as individuals, but as a species. We know extinction is possible. We know we're causing it for countless other species. And we know or should know, that we're not exempt from the rules that govern all life. The Ediacarans teach us that success is always temporary, that dominance doesn't last, that the universe doesn't care about our plans or our achievements. But they also teach us something more hopeful, that while you're here, while you exist, you matter. You're part of the universe examining itself. You're a chapter in the story of life, however brief. And that's worth something. Not cosmically, perhaps, but to us, in this moment, it's everything. Reginald Sprigg walked into those rust-colored hills, looking for one thing and found another. He opened a window into deep time, into a world so strange we're still trying to understand it nearly 80 years later. He gave us the Ediacarans, and in doing so, he gave us a gift more valuable than any gold. He gave us perspective. He showed us that Earth's history is deeper, stranger, and more wonderful than we imagined. That life has been here in forms we barely recognize. That we are not the first experiment, and we will not be the last. The Ediacaran period is over. It ended 538 million years ago when the Cambrian began. But in the rocks of Australia, Newfoundland, Namibia, China, Russia, it lives on, waiting for us to find it, to study it, to learn from it, to be humbled by it, to be inspired by it. The Ediacarans were here. They were real. They mattered. And they still matter, because they show us that the story of life is longer, stranger, and more wonderful than we ever dreamed. That evolution is creative, relentless, and utterly indifferent to outcomes. That complexity can arise in forms we don't expect and vanish just as quickly. That the rules can change, and when they do, even the most successful organisms can disappear. That's their legacy. And it's a legacy that will endure as long as there are rocks and fossils and curious minds willing to ask, what were they? How did they live? And what can they teach us about ourselves? The answers are still emerging. The story is still being written. And the Ediacarans, silent in their stone tombs, are still waiting to tell us their secrets. All we have to do is listen.